Well, I can see that people have joined us, and I appreciate everyone tuning in on this Monday morning. Hope you had a great weekend. Um, Certainly, there's a lot going on. The Trump Epstein scandal is not going away despite his best attempts to distract with anything and everything. And I'm sure you saw that our friends over at the Lincoln Project got a special shout out in his latest lawsuit against Rupert Murdoch of all people. So we'll certainly be talking about that. But Lisa and Lisa Senecal, our founding editor, and I'm Susan
Hi,
Demas,
everybody.
the executive editor. We are going to be talking about a couple stories that haven't gotten as much attention, and starting with some of the nefarious actions that Trump's Department of Justice is taking, which really seems to be a preemptive strike with our elections next year, which, as we know, are not looking very good for Trump and Republicans. But there are a lot of fingers being placed on the scale, whether it's with gerrymandering in Texas and other red states, or going in and demanding voter information, voter rolls from blue states like Arizona and Pennsylvania, and New York, Minnesota. There are a couple red states in there, Oklahoma and Alaska. But I mean, by and large, we know what this is about because, I mean, Minnesota, for instance, is just a model of election integrity. They never have any problems. So they're trying to solve a problem that doesn't exist, or a problem they think is coming, which is that Donald Trump's party might not do well in the midterms. And so they want to mess around with things, which is incredibly scary. And we should give credit to Marc Elias's Democracy Docket because they are all over this. And, we're always so focused on voting in elections during election years, but, they're the folks that are looking at this 24/7, 365 days a week. And so, Lisa, what do you make of all of this?
Well, I think a couple of things. It certainly signals Trump's weakness and his fear about having to face free and fair elections in 2026. The DOJ, we know that this illegal voting charade has always been a means to be able to put fingers on the scale in our elections and get access to information that they have no business getting information on. So they're looking to understand, and a lot of some of what they're asking for is publicly available information.
Right.
And so it seems in some cases that this is nothing more than an intimidation tactic, having the Department of Justice asking for the names of all of the people who are involved in executing the election. So, election workers, people in different counties, the more they can um, make people feel uncomfortable about
Right.
volunteering and helping to run our election system, the more chance they have of making the elections less trustworthy, unfortunately. But, chaos is always the goal with these guys, right? It's never if, as you said with Minnesota, if you wanted to truly make sure that elections across the country were run as well as they could be, you would hold up Minnesota as a shining example to be replicated across the country because they do it incredibly well. And a lot of other states do too. And we know overall, I mean, even in Trump's first term, he had this ridiculous investigation that went on for, I don't know, a year and a half and came back showing that there is virtually no non-citizen voting happening. There are not people who in the extremely rare cases when someone does vote who isn't legally allowed to vote, it's usually just because of confusion. They tend to be people who have had a felony conviction, served their time, and understood that they were allowed to vote again. And at times, they understood that because Trump's administration was telling them that it was okay for them to vote again, and then they would get in trouble when they had done it. So, it is, a complete smokescreen for what it is they really want to do, and that's getting their hands on information that they shouldn't and intimidating, um, the elections in states across the
Right.
country, and a lot of them, coincidentally, happen to be swing states.
Right. And we know that Trump seems to have a special fixation on Minnesota because Governor Tim Walz was Kamala Harris's running mate. And, you know, I feel like, especially with Trump and MAGA land, they have a lot of contempt for Tim Walz because look, this is a guy who really does, go to Menards on the weekend. He knows how to change the oil on his car and fix a lot more than that. And we all know that JD Vance is not tinkering in the garage on weekends. That's not who he is. That's not who most of these guys are. Kash Patel, come on, give me a
Yeah.
break. And so, they see that Tim Walz is a threat and, a threat to them electorally, to what their vision of MAGA masculinity is. And they want to be the ones to determine who really gets to vote. Not and our elections are very decentralized.
Yeah.
Local election clerks have an enormous amount of power to administer elections because otherwise they wouldn't work. Even at the state level, they're supposed to be in charge, not the Department of Justice, but we can see that, like everything else, Trump wants to be in control of this. He wants to decide, "Oh, you vote straight Democratic. Oh, all of a sudden there's a problem with your voting registration. Oh, I can see that you live in Cleveland or Detroit or Chicago. Well, given the voting patterns there, I think we're gonna have a lot more problems with you registering to vote than, if you're in rural red counties." This is, for a party that traditionally has been all about, getting the government out of your business and government being so small, this is a huge government overreach and, has some pretty serious implications. And going beyond this, there have been a lot of stories about, these trial balloons over, hey, maybe we'll throw election officials in jail if we don't like what they're doing. I mean, this
Yeah.
is straight up from an authoritarian playbook, going after the people who are just trying to make things work because they're not making things work in a way that fits the king, that fits Donald Trump. And I have to say, this is of personal concern to me because my daughter Angela Demas is in charge of the elections in my township here in Michigan, and she does a great job. And the idea that she could be thrown in jail because she is an elected Democrat in a key area in terms of, deterrent, because, if he's able to knock 1,000 voters off the rolls here, that could make a huge difference in a very competitive congressional district, next year. That's very scary to me. And even if I didn't have a personal connection, I mean, you know, our elections are supposed to be the pride of the world. We send election monitors into, Georgia and, the former Soviet republics and,
Yeah.
to make sure that they have fair and free elections. And look what's happening here now.
Yeah, and it's, uh, especially bad in places like Arizona. There is really, we already have, someone who was involved in the previous election who was convicted because of her actions messing around with voting machines, and it appears that the not quite sure who this guy really works for. He's claiming that he's doing things on behalf of the Trump administration, but asking to get access not to voter rolls, but to the actual machines,
Right.
which should deeply alarm everyone. And layered on that is that the Trump administration is definitely playing footsie with the idea of helping this convicted felon who was inappropriately messing with machines. Who's supposed to, I don't remember how long her term is that she's supposed to be serving, but they wanna help get that overturned,
Mhm.
and that just signals to their supporters around the country that you can do things that are illegal and interfere with our elections, and they're gonna have your back. They're gonna
Right.
find a way to absolve you of your criminal responsibility and having to, deal with the repercussions of what you've done, which is, the same signal that they sent to the January 6th insurrectionists,
Right.
right? You can do these illegal things as long as you're doing them in my name, in service of my objectives, and we're going to find a way to get you out of your criminal liability for these. And so don't worry about doing it again.
Right. And, what we saw in the 2020 election, which Trump lost, and he's still not over that fact, is that, a lot of these, MAGA folks in swing states like Wisconsin and um, Arizona, Michigan, even some states that, are not really on the bubble like Colorado, they were all trying to mess with, the machinery of elections, whether it's the physical machines or voting rolls. And there have been, dozens of local cases prosecuting these folks. And now Trump is using them as the model for how he wants to mess with elections going forward in 2026. It's kind of this rolling coup from January 6th on, whether it's, making sure that everybody gets out of prison and they don't have a record, or the folks that were doing thing that weren't on the streets, beating police, but behind the scenes messing with equipment, that they're the ones that get to count the votes in the end. So this is definitely something for us to keep an eye on. Another story that I think needs a little more attention is what Netanyahu is trying to pull in Israel, because he has seen that Trump is so compliant that he's willing to bomb Iran for him. But all of these stories that we saw burbling up in the run up to the 2024 election, where there was a lot more attention, sadly, on the tragedy in Gaza. I mean, 67 folks were killed just trying to get aid over the weekend. The tragedy there is still unfolding. It's just not above the fold, as we used to say in journalism.
Yeah.
It's not getting that attention. But, really, the plans that Israel has under Netanyahu for Palestine it's just frightening. It's straight up ethnic cleansing. It's moving millions of people from Palestine, and they think that they have, to Ethiopia, and they think that they have partners in the White House to do this, and they probably do, because Trump has been talking about trying to make Gaza, beachfront property, and he had that disgusting ad about, a Trump resort, and
Yeah.
turning into luxury condos. And I think a lot of people kind of thought, oh, it's Trump's bluster, Trump's being Trump, and we don't like the Biden administration's policy. But sadly, I mean, I think we are answering the question, can things get worse in Gaza? Yes, they can. And this is frightening.
Yeah, we should know by now that anytime Trump does something like that ad, like the comments that he's made, he's floating trial balloons to see how people are going to react and what the degree of pushback against what he's saying will be. And that's certainly what that disgusting proposal to take the land that people are living on, that has been their home for generations, and forcibly move them out. Now, Netanyahu is saying that this would be voluntary for Palestinians to leave Gaza. Um, it's not really, you are not able to make a voluntary decision if where you are living is being constantly bombarded. You are starving to death. You cannot, literally, I was listening to a report this morning of some doctors who are working in the Palestinian territory, and they they are, misjudging the age of children who are coming in, believing they're much younger than they are because they're so small, because they are starving to death. So, 15-year-olds look like 11-year-olds because developmentally and just physically because of wasting. They don't have the body structure that they should have at 15 years old. And the horrific stuff that's happening around the aid being brought, the little bit of aid that is coming in, that seems to be now, to be able to attempt to get food for yourself and your family, you're taking your life in your hands, to go to those aid stations or there was a convoy going in that was being approached by a lot of starving people, right? We have to understand these are people who are as desperate as people can possibly be. And I think everybody has to just take a moment to think about what you would do and how you would feel if you were in a position, forget about whether you're starving, but when you have your children who you can't feed, when formula is completely unavailable and nursing mothers can no longer nurse their children because they are so starved that they don't produce milk to be able to nurse their children any longer, and so their babies are wasting away and dying in their arms. So to think you're not going to have desperation around these food trucks that come in, um, there is not enough effort being made, and all of the things you can do to put in place um, circumstances to make those situations safer. And I don't believe that Israel wants those situations to be safer, because when people act out desperately, it gives them an excuse to um, to shoot 11-year-olds in the head and stomach, which is what doctors are seeing coming in to their emergency room. So it's horrific. I believe it's intentional. I think Netanyahu and the majority of Israelis, this isn't just the or one American's opinion on this. The majority of Israelis do not support what Netanyahu is doing. But he is going to do whatever he can to stay in power as long as he can,
Right.
because if he isn't in power any longer, he's going to prison.
Right.
This is where
I
he
mean,
was
there are
headed before
criminal
this all happened.
Right. There are serious criminal charges pending against both he and his wife Sarah, and so, the parallels with what we are experiencing here in America with Donald Trump are, I mean, if you scripted it, they would tell you, "Oh, this seems a little too on the nose,"
Yeah.
and I think that Trump has seen the playbook that Netanyahu has deployed and said, "That's working out pretty well. I also have no regard for human life. This is what I'm going to do too." I mean, we saw that Netanyahu went after the independent judiciary. Trump is doing the same thing. And there have been mass protests in Israel, massive, massive protests. But Netanyahu has stayed in power every time the government seems to crumble. He's able to come back because there's so much factionalism and so many different interests. And so, for us, I feel like the lesson there is you have to stay united with one goal. And the goal here is to defeat Donald Trump and to keep our democracy. And that takes the effort of all of us to come together, and we have very different views on many, many issues, whether it's taxes or on issues like reproductive health care. And those are important questions for us to deal with. But right now, we need to make sure that we live in a country where we still have these basic rights that, we have enjoyed for almost 250 years. Not all of us, which we should say. But, the idea of trying to perfect our democracy and move forward, we are facing the biggest threat that we ever have. And so we don't want to end up like Israel. We don't want to end up a country where we are so corrupted that we are willing to force millions of people to leave and to cut off their health care and for the military to commit these horrendous acts of violence. That's not who we want to be here in the US. I view Israel as a real cautionary tale. And, I think it's important for us. We had such a great showing back in June with the No Kings protests, but the next huge day of action has to be even bigger than that to send the message to Trump.
Yep, which is starting to be organized, by 50501, and that's on August 2nd. So everybody, check out what might be happening around where you live, so you can go out and stand up for democracy and the rule of law. I do want to say, you know, people can have very different views about Israel and whether or not there should be a Palestinian state and whether there should be a Jewish state. Um, this is so beyond that. This isn't about whether or not Israel has a right to exist, which I believe that it does. Um, this is about treating um, fellow humans as humans
Right.
and not being able to wipe away that humanity to the degree that you can be annihilating a people.
Yes.
And that is what's happening in Gaza right now.
Yes.
And you can both be um, completely horrified and disgusted and furious about what Hamas did um, in Israel. It was a slaughter. It was disgusting. Um, that does not mean that there are not innocent people living in Gaza who have nothing to do with what Hamas did and brutalizing these people and making where they live unlivable in the hope that you can get them to self-deport so you can pretend that you're not really relocating these people.
Mhm.
It's ethnic cleansing, it's disgusting,
Right.
and it's got to end.
It does. And right now there are no guardrails, as I feel like there, were many, many criticisms of the Biden administration and then Kamala Harris, who is running. And, those were extremely fair debates to have. But it's clear that there were some checks on Netanyahu's utter cruelty and disgusting policies that do not exist anymore. I mean, there's a reason why Israel and then the US decided to bomb Iran now.
Yeah.
Things have spun so out of control. And, look at what we are experiencing here in the US. I mean, we are deporting people to violent nations like the Sudan, and our Supreme Court has said that is okay to just throw people into a war-torn region that they are not from because Donald Trump has decided that those people don't deserve to live in our country anymore. I mean, we are seeing the start of, Donald Trump's own plans for ethnic cleansing with the so-called alligator Alcatraz, which is a concentration camp down in the Florida Everglades where it is the conditions are not meant for any humans to live, and he does not regard anyone there as being human. And once you lose your humanity, that we have seen time and time again in history, there are horrible things that happen. And so anyone with a conscience has to stand up. And right now, you know I would love if Donald Trump was losing, his popularity because of his cruel immigration policies or throwing millions of people off healthcare with Medicare, Medicaid, and the Affordable Care Act cuts that are in that budget bill that he rammed through. And we are seeing these losing support. But, in politics, things work in weird ways. And right now, the biggest problem for him is the Epstein files. And, for those of us, I think, who are part of the Lincoln Square community, we're much, much more focused on other issues that are affecting us. The idea of losing your health care is everything. The idea that your electric costs are going up because Trump has a weird thing with windmills and birds. I mean, these are real serious concerns for us. The fact that, oh, if you go to the grocery store, I can tell you things are not any cheaper. All of his promises are, just complete crap. But the fact of the matter is that to the people who have stood by him for years, the reason why he is still in the White House, because they viewed him as this godlike figure who, was going to take out the deep swamp and corruption. Some of those folks literally are turning on him over the Epstein files because, look, like everything else, he lied about it. He doesn't want to release them. I think we all know why. But, beyond that, Trump's promises aren't worth the paper they're printed on. We all know that. And those files are never going to be released. And there are a lot of people who are very invested in that. And, you can see his polling numbers are tanking. And it's up to those of us who want to save our democracy to take advantage of that, to,
Yeah,
to
I
help us
agree.
build a broader movement.
Yeah, I think one of the things we need to be doing right now is making sure people understand that Trump's request and Bondi's moves now to release testimony, grand jury testimony, is
Which is
it's
highly redacted.
it is it's a fig leaf. It's an attempt to say that they were transparent. This grand jury testimony is highly redacted. It those grand juries were also only um, impounded to look into the illegality of Epstein and Maxwell and not the other people who were potential and clients is a really deceptive word that's being used because you generally think of clients as being paying customers, right? If you have a client, it's somebody who has hired you to perform a service or provide something to them, but
Mhm.
but there is money being exchanged. I don't think that's what he was doing. I don't think Epstein was charging um, any of these men who were involved in sex with children. And I want to make sure we're really careful not to say young women or underage girls. Girls by definition are underage,
Yes.
right? These were girls. These are girls uh 13, 14, 15, 16 years old being trafficked. The idea that they were participating in any of this willingly is so deeply cruel and offensive to all of the survivors of not just Epstein and Maxwell, but they know who abused them. And I'm sure many of them are very, very afraid to have to publicly disclose who it was who uh, the men who raped them. And that's what it it's what it was. You don't have consensual sex with children.
No.
So
Children cannot consent.
no, they can't consent. Even if they say yes, they are not consenting. That is not that's not something that you're able to do in that kind of power dynamic and at that developmental level that children are at, right? That's why we do things to protect children, which is why these supporters of Trump's who became deeply engaged in MAGA, so many of them started out down this road truly believing that they were getting involved in defense of children. And they emotionally and mentally, and a lot of them financially, committed to this. They lost family members because they were deeply committed to this. And he knew that. And he took advantage of it when he thought it was going to work well for him. And now Trump is, he's paying the price of radicalizing people. But there there is truth to this one. It's not the Pizzagate truth. It's, not some of the more extreme insanity, but yes, there was a network of wealthy and well-connected men who
Mhm.
Jeffrey Epstein and Maxwell were trafficking
Right.
girls to. And they should be angry that they were
Yes.
promised this information and it is now being denied. And we should make sure that people understand that these grand jury uh, transcripts are a meaningless release if they end up being released. And if they're not released, it's going to be Trump and Bondi who are going to be out there saying, "Well, we tried, we tried to disclose this, and the courts wouldn't let us. So our hands are tied." And that's complete bullshit because they have reams and reams of information that could be released, that they are the decision makers. Trump has decided that the DOJ works for him. Well, unfortunately, now he doesn't get to claim that, well, the DOJ needs to be an independent agency, and I'm not going to get involved with decisions being made at the Department of Justice. This has been a longstanding tradition that we don't interfere with the Department of Justice. He blew that out of the water. That doesn't have, that does not hold water at this point. So he's going to have to deal with the fact that he has created a demand for information and made people believe that the reason this information was not being released was because somebody who could release it was not in power. He is now in power and he is choosing not to release the information. So, you know, good luck, Donald. It's a bed you made. It is a disgusting, filthy bed that you made, and you are now stuck lying in it. And I do hope that people don't let go of this because he has a decades and decades long history. He is an adjudicated. Um, I want to be careful how we say this. Um, the court found him liable for the sexual assault of E. Jean Carroll. And we know that he paid to try to cover up his affair with a porn star 4 months after the birth of his youngest child. So, we know who the guy is, and he deserves no free pass on
Right.
this one.
And Donald Trump has used the DOJ as his personal law firm, so
We
the
know that's how
idea.
Bondi thinks of herself. She's
Right.
she's Trump's lawyer.
Right. And we've seen what he's been doing, with these demands of voting rules in other states and so many other examples. And so the idea that all of a sudden now he's being hands off, that's a huge red flag. And, uh, my personal opinion, and I think the opinion of all of us here, is that we do not care who is on the list. If they're a bunch of Democrats, Republicans, whatever.
Yep.
If you're on this list, you should be exposed. You should be held accountable for your actions. The idea that the very rich and powerful in this country are able to get away with God knows what in terms of our tax code. I mean, that's a problem. And there are many problems we have to solve, but the fact that you get a free pass on child rape, certainly not. Anyone should be held accountable. And, if Trump does release something, I'm sure that it will be filled with misinformation or missing information at this point. We've already seen, this the AI video of Obama being arrested, that he's been trying to throw out there. We have all the MAGA influencers who are saying there is such a massive scandal under Obama with national security. I'm on the phone right now with national security officers about what he did. He's the real problem in terms of Russia. It's Russiagate, but for Obama. Again, and, there are so many distractions that Trump has been trying, and, frankly, a lot of them seem to be falling flat. But at the same time, if you look through the noise, if you haven't read the Miami Herald's just harrowing
Julie Brown,
series,
amazing.
yes, on Epstein and his crimes, it's a good time to revisit that because that's real reporting, and I am in awe of some of the people that have been coming forward, like Maria Farmer over the weekend, who is one of the victims of Epstein, and she said twice she told the FBI to look into Donald Trump and was ignored, and she's willing to say that now and take on the president of the United States, and there are a lot of victims who are now women who are coming forward and they're putting their names to it. While these criminals are hiding, under the cloak of anonymity, they're being protected by Donald Trump, and they deserve uh, so much respect for putting themselves out there. Um, but, I will say this in terms of the ongoing fear that we've seen with the Epstein files. Um, it really does expose the big lie of Donald Trump's presidency. I mean, there are a lot of lies, He'll fix everything. Inflation was supposed to go down. There's supposed to be peace in the Middle East, peace in Ukraine. All this was supposed to be done on day one. And we're living with wars
90
and
deals
chaos.
in 90 days.
Right, for trade deals, none of which have happened. Um, but, for the Epstein files, he was supposed to be the godlike figure who was going to root out this massive corruption, this pedophile ring of liberals that was running everything. And as it turns out, he seems to have some very good reasons for not doing that. And, if that's what it takes for folks on the MAGA side to say, maybe this guy is not on the up and up. Maybe maybe he is why I suddenly don't have health insurance. Whatever it takes, because he is a fraud. He is a very dangerous person who the only person he cares about is himself, and he seems to just utterly revel in the suffering of others. And at some point, I certainly hope that if this is what takes him down, whatever it takes, because the damage that he has managed to do in 6 months is just incredible.
Yeah, I mean, whatever his involvement, was with Jeffrey Epstein, um, even if he had no involvement, the public has a right to know what this man did, why it was covered up for so long, why the first time he was arrested and prosecuted for this, he got a sweetheart deal, and somehow, the guy representing
Thanks,
him,
Bill Barr.
yeah, yeah, and Anna Costa, who ended up now in a cabinet secretary. So it is outrageous that, even if Trump were not involved, he knows that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of victims of this man, and that there is very likely evidence against, people beyond Epstein and Maxwell who were uh, brutalizing these children, and they should be prosecuted. These survivors deserve justice, and justice is never going to be delivered to them unless these people are exposed and prosecuted. And as you said, I don't care who they are. I do not care if it is, as MAGA wants to believe, it is almost all Democrat.
Mhm,
Fine. Let the chips fall. They
mhm.
should. I don't party um allegiance. Hard stop, hard line at, child rape, right?
Yeah,
We should all be able to agree that anybody who participated in any of this, does not deserve, to be protected or to have anyone's allegiance. They deserve to be prosecuted. They deserve to spend time, for their crimes and to be made an example of, so the next people who think that they are above the law are going to think twice before they choose to rape a child.
absolutely, absolutely. And, to some degree, this is about the coalition of the decent, all of us try and do the right thing. We would never dream of doing anything close to this. And, you know, to me, this really just spells out who Donald Trump is and who his friends have been. And these are people who think they are above the law. Decency is for little people. They can do whatever they want. And that is how Donald Trump has run this country. And so, it's up to us to stand up and to reassert what this country is about, the rule of law, helping your neighbor. Nobody wants to see your neighbor being thrown out of their house because suddenly they couldn't afford that hospital bill. There's no reason for this to happen in our country. We should be moving forward. We should not be, trying to go backwards to medieval times. And to some extent, it seems like Trump and his weird friends in Silicon Valley, that's kind of the vision that he has. And that is not what the majority of us in America want. And so I think it's up to us to turn out on August 2nd at the next mass protest. We need to continue to hold our elected officials accountable for that horrible budget bill that they voted for, which, we know that our Republican members of Congress, they knew it was a terrible bill, but Donald Trump told them to do it. He said jump and they jumped. And so, I think probably, before we leave this discussion here, we should talk a little bit more about, ways that we can fight back because, it's overwhelming. There's a lot going on, but, we have a wonderful community here at Lincoln Square and in the rest of the pro-democracy community, and there are more of us than there are of them.
There are, and I think as difficult as it is, one of the things that we all need to be looking within ourselves to try to figure out how we are going to manage this is to show some grace, to people who have been in the MAGA movement who are starting to realize that they have been duped because, spiking the ball, doing the "I told you so's," that's not going to be helpful in pulling people back to reality and,
Mhm,
making people feel like they have a home to come to if they do, um, leave their support of Donald Trump and what he's doing behind. Because one of the reasons that people stay in these movements and double down is because this is a community that they have built around themselves. And the fear, and a lot of these people, separated themselves from the rest of their family. And to feel as though you alienated everyone except your MAGA kin at this point, and now you're going to separate yourself from them. We have to be able to show people that there is a place to come to. We need a baseline of things that we can agree on, and I think that's basic human decency. And if we can just start with the fact that we think all people deserve to be treated with dignity and respect, and that we all agree on protecting children, that's a good place to start.
mhm.
And we can find room in a very big tent to welcome those people into it and start having conversations about the other things that we disagree on. But don't make people feel uncomfortable to acknowledge that they're realizing that maybe they made a mistake,
Mhm.
because we have all made mistakes, and maybe these feel like bigger ones to those of us who feel like we saw this all along. But um, you know, there but for the grace of God go I, and we don't know what the circumstances of a lot of people who got sucked into the Trump coalition have been. And I just encourage people. Um, it can feel temporarily very emotionally rewarding to be able to do the "I told you so's" and make fun of people on social media who are now, you feel like they're getting their comeuppance. But
Mhm.
give them space to come over and support something different and speak out about what they've learned. So maybe they're the people who are best able to reach more people in the MAGA movement
Yeah.
and allow them without humiliation to speak up and try to bring other people back into the fold of reality.
Right. I would say, vent in your private group chats. It's a natural feeling, and that's a good place for it. Not telling you to shove those feelings down, but as for everyone out there, come on over. The water's fine. Jump on in the pro democracy community, because if you were just strolling by one of those No Kings protests, I can tell you they were a lot of fun. There were folks who were joking and laughing, and there was water and snacks being provided, just people wanting to make sure that their neighbors were okay on a hot day. People were going out and having a drink afterwards, and talking, getting to know folks that they hadn't known before. It's that sort of community that we need to build, and it's so important. And one thing that I love about Lincoln Square is that we have that online. I love the chats that we have, and I love hearing from all of you. And it's so important that we do that, online, so we can build those bridges in person. Um, but if there's one good thing that can come out of all of this, it's that us realizing we're neighbors. We're here to help each other, trying to break that down as MAGA and the Trump administration has tried to. I think they're realizing just how resilient we are as Americans. This country is worth fighting for, and it's because we see ourselves as fighting for something bigger than ourselves. This is about democracy, the rule of law, the kind of country that we want to be, the kind of people we want to be. And so I so appreciate all of you being here so early on a Monday morning, and having Lisa join us every week, because Lisa helped build what Lincoln Square is. And so thank you so much.
Yeah, and all of you helped build Lincoln Square. So I will echo what Susan said. Thank you all for being here. Thanks for sharing the content and supporting Lincoln Square as you do. And Susan, thanks for all the work that you're doing. You're doing an amazing job.
Oh, thank you. And thanks to all of you. I hope you have a wonderful Monday.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.